tell you the story of Bob the railway dog. Bob was a big name in South Australia back in the day. Bob was born around about 1878. It's a long time ago in the Adelaide Hills around Macclesfield. And Bob has probably seen more of South Australia than most of us because for whatever reason and how it happened, who knows, maybe my next guest will be able to elaborate on this, but Bob had a love of trains, steam trains back in the day, of course. And he would jump trains, train to train, and travelled all over the state. As I say, probably seen more of it than many South Australians. Right up to Oodnadatta, he was seen in WA. How that happened, probably unlikely, they say, because there was no railway through at the time, but apparently sighted there. Seen in, as I said, Oodnadatta. He travelled on steamers up the Murray and might have mistaken the whistle of the steamer for a steam train and jumped on, not realising. But there's a statue of Bob in the main street of Peterborough. There's a statue of him at the National Railway Museum, and certainly a number of books. And at least a couple of them have been written by my next guest, John Wilson. Bob the Railway Dog is one of his books, and he's also been campaigning to get Bob, the story of Bob, written as a movie because, you know, we've had Red Dog. I mean, there's the dog on the Tucker box and so many stories about fantastic dogs. But Bob the Railway Dog deserves a place in folklore. He already has one, I suppose. And if you talk to anyone in the railway industry of the last 100 years or so, they've probably heard the story. John Wilson, good morning.
Good morning, Matthew. Good morning, listeners.
Tell us a little bit more about Bob. I've just given a very brief history. He was an Irish wolfhound, wasn't he, of sorts?
Well, we don't know. He was probably a Smithfield, which is a type of an English sheepdog or a poodle cross.
Right.
He was a most remarkable dog. He was described by some of the railway workers as almost knowing as much as a man, very intelligent and wise. And if you upset Bob, he'd never give you another chance.
Is that right?
He was very selective in the people that he dealt with.
Yeah. So now, you've written, a couple of books, as I said, Bob the Railway Dog and The Amazing Adventures of Railway Bob. And that's more of the one you want converted into a film. That's
right. Back in 2019, I researched Bob and did a serious history of Bob, which was called Bob's Railway. And we did that based on about 100 contemporary newspaper reports and other archival references. And it gave us a pretty good picture of Bob. And when we looked at it all, we said there's got to be a movie in this because there was no other dog in the world who had adventures and as many and as varied as Bob the Railway Dog. And it's begging to be made into a television series or a movie, and I think it's got international potential, and it could be wonderful for South Australia. But from the point of view of its tourism potential in international tourism, and also from the point of view of the heritage railway organisations, which would be used to promote the tourism potential.
Now, Bob ended up at Peterborough because of a station master at Tarawi who moved there and had sort of adopted Bob as his own, although Bob didn't really seem to belong to anyone, I suppose, in that he travelled the trains.
It was a chap called William Ferry who was a special guard, and he spied Bob on a special movement from Adelaide to Carrington where they had 200 dogs on board. And these were being used by the Vermin Board to chase rabbits down holes, and the workers from the Vermin Board would push carbon disulfide wads down the rabbit holes and eradicate the rabbits. And Ferry identified this dog as being of a high quality within the 200 dogs on board. And he asked the man when he got to Carrington if he could buy the dog. And he said no, but then he said, if you can buy another dog, I'll do a swap.
And so it happened, all right. So Bob ended up at Peterborough and he'd jump on and off trains from there and go wherever they took him.
He enjoyed a very narrow window of opportunity because if he'd been a dog in the 1870s, his travels would have been confined to the line to Port Pirie. But in the 1880s, there was a connecting up of all the lines. And so Bob was able to travel widely. He travelled across to Victoria. He was seen at the opening of the Hawkesbury Bridge in New South Wales. He was even believed to have got up as far as Queensland.
Wow. So he's seen a fair bit of Australia.
He certainly did, and he was loved by the engine crews.
Mm. Is that where he would travel, near the fire, near the coal box somewhere?
Yes, that was his favourite spot up on the tender. And he would know an engineman by the smell of the engine grease on his trousers.
Yeah, right.
If he didn't have engine grease, he wouldn't come near you.
How about that? So, all right, attempts to get the story made into a film. Now, I understand you've hit a few brick walls in that.
Well, we've been told right from the beginning that it's a hard market to crack.
Uh-huh.
But when I did the book in 2019, we were a bit naive about the movie industry, and we thought that since we had a good history and a profile on Bob, that it could excite some people in the movie industry, but it fell flat. They weren't interested in serious history. They wanted to have a semi-fictional sort of a character, and one that lived for many episodes.
Right.
So that was why we wrote The Amazing Adventures of Railway Bob. There are 14 chapters there, and each one is equivalent to a 1-hour television series episode.
Mm.
And we've engaged consultants to assist us, and the general feeling is that this has got legs, this is going to go somewhere, but it's going to take time. And one of the other pieces of advice we've had is that you've got to stick at it.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. Look, if we can have a couple of movies on Red Dog, surely we can have something happening on Bob the Railway Dog. Makes sense to me.
Well, we watched Red Dog and we were left utterly amazed that could get in the top 10, and Bob can't even get a movie because Bob's story is just so much more amazing than Red Dog's.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, it seems to me to have a dog and a cute larrikin-looking dog from the photos that exist of Bob, so that wouldn't be too hard to replicate. It's got trains. I mean, who doesn't like trains, right? So
that's right.
There's that. And it's got Australian outback and great characters, so it seems...
It's got history.
Yeah, it's got history. There we are. So it's got a fair bit. What happened to Bob in the end? What was the outcome for Bob?
Well, Bob became an alcoholic.
Oh, really?
He was taken in by a chap who ran the Royal Hotel in Hindley Street.
Uh-huh.
Now, this was at a time when there was runctions in the South Australian Railways, in that C.C. Kingston was the premier at the time, and he was a bit of a rascal.
Yeah, Charles Cameron.
He fell out of favour with Joseph Henry Smith, who was the Railway Commissioner. Now, Smith had quite a soft spot for Bob, but Kingston was on a mission to get rid of Smith, and he did, in fact, in 1895. And it seems that Bob, with his seventh sense, got the message that he was no longer wanted on the trains. Mm-hmm. And so he fell into the company of a Mick Tier, who ran the Royal Hotel in Hindley Street, and he used to drink out of the slops buckets in the front bar.
Gee.
And in the end, he went under a butcher's cart, and that was the end of him.
Oh, poor Bob. So, all right. He had a collar you can see that today at the National Railway Museum.
That's right, yeah.
In Port
They
Adelaide.
regard that as probably their most valuable artefact.
Is that right? There we are.
Stop me not, but let me jog, for I am Bob the driver's dog, SAR. Now, the SAR was important because that meant that he was official on the South Australian Railways. He had an all-lines ticket and he could go anywhere.
How about that?
And everybody recognised him by his collar.
Goodness me. All right. There's photos, as I say, a statue in Peterborough in the main street where Bob resided for part of his life. And it's a remarkable story of Bob, and it must have been amazing for people to see him at the time. And he was a bit of a celebrity, I suppose.
He was, but his story didn't get outside of Australia. There was only one story that got into one of the English newspapers. But he was a genuine South Australian. He was born and died in South Australia. And we're keen to get a movie or a television series up in South Australia. We want to keep it in South Australia.
Yeah. It sounds like a no-brainer for the SA Film Corporation, doesn't it?
Well, the SA Film Corporation is really a beehive full of lots of little individual businesses that are attached to the movie industry.
Right.
So that they're not a central organising body, but we've made some initial contacts and we're working our way through. So we're going to get there, we reckon.
Yeah, good. Well, I hope you do. Keep in touch, John. I'd love to follow it up because, I mean, it sounds like a story that needs to be told on film. And as I said, we all love dogs and trains and outback and characters, and it just seems to have the great mix of Australiana in it that would make it a hit, and depending on the right actors and all the rest of it, which the experts in the film industry would know all about. But a story begging to be told. But certainly your books, Bob the Railway Dog and the Adventures of Bob. Just correct me on the name there. The Amazing Adventures of Railway Bob. There we are. So, yeah, there we are by John Wilson, who is my guest today. Hopefully the film gets up, and John, stay in touch.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you. John Wilson there, who's written a number of railway books, not just about Bob the Railway Dog, but there's books on the Overland and others as well. You can Google him and find those, but certainly on Bob the Railway Dog. You'd love to see a film on that, wouldn't you? I would. I think that'll be all right. I mean, I sat through Red Dog and all the others. Benji back in the day. Remember Benji in the 70s? We like a good dog film. And Bob the Railway Dog. Why not? Surely someone could make that. 11:45.